welcome back to Todos Santos. In this episode, we're picking up exactly where we left off, by the river. And we put all this infrastructure together, making these roads using the intersection marking tool and node controller, two of my new favorite mods. And we're going to be filling it in with buildings and trees and walkable areas and just generally making it a little more lively and interesting and a nicer place to be. It's also going to add a nice bit of definition to the skyline, and of course, it's also going to be filling in all these gaps so that we don't have that very unsatisfying look of having empty patches of green all over the city, which is just no good. So it's always a challenge to get road networks into skinny areas like this, even when they're flat. And then here I have quite a steep hill, and I think I'm really pushing the limits of what's realistic in terms of putting development here, at least in terms of how I end up arranging the buildings and the roads and everything. But I try to stick with what I've been doing throughout the city, which is these kind of long, skinny blocks, using the smallest roads I have, which are these one-way roads with parking. And to try to get this weird little bridge to look a little better, I switched the embankment there, which looks sort of funny, especially when the cars are driving along it. But it smoothed it out a little bit. And I mentioned this last episode, but this would be the sort of build that I don't think I'd be able to do, or at least do well, without node controller, because as you can see here, you can make these nodes sloped, which makes the roads look a lot better. Of course, I end up messing it up here because I'm still fairly new to the mod at the point I recorded this episode. But it just allows you to build on slopes so much more easily. It's not always a perfect solution. Sometimes there's just an intersection like that you just can't get to work. And that's fine, but the mod as a whole, in general, allows you to just get these amazing intersections on slopes that you otherwise would not even be able to come close to achieving. I honestly don't know how anyone ever played without this mod. So if you haven't downloaded it, check out my mod list below, or just look up Node Controller on the workshop. I believe there are a couple versions of it. I'm using the original one, but you'll want to look into those and figure out which one is best for you. So if you'll remember back a couple episodes, I started putting down some high rises on the tip of the peninsula, and that was one of my first attempts of trying to really not quite replicate, but to take a lot of inspiration from the way high rises are arranged in San Juan, which of course it's not the exact same all over the city. There are plenty of different sorts of development that I can see, but in general, I take a little bit more from real life for this build, and kind of get halfway there, I think, as opposed to my last attempt where it was just sort of, it was okay. But I think I learned quite a bit since then. And basically what I do is I have these buildings and try to not squish them wall to wall, which is kind of just my general inclination for this sort of build. Although, of course, there are areas where there are wall to wall buildings, absolutely. But in general, I'm trying to go for this look where they're spaced out, and then generally they'll have lots in between, which is usually taken up by parking, some sort of fencing, and of course, trees. So we spent a lot of time on parking and trees in this episode, and in future episodes, which I really want to just tell you what these future episodes are, but I don't want to spoil anything. But we come back to this kind of build in a different area and kind of evolve it even more and go into a bit more detail. But for this build, I just go with this kind of look, and I think I still squish them too close together overall, so I have come back and thinned them out just a little bit off screen. You might be able to catch that in the cinematics. You might also catch some spoilers in the cinematics if you watch closely. Nothing too major. Because I have, you might have noticed this over some of the last few episodes, but I have come back and recorded new cinematics where the quality of the footage is a bit better than the quality of the time lapse. And that's to do with several things. I resolved my problems with the cinematic camera mod, or I didn't really resolve them, but I figured out what was causing my game to crash when I used it. And it's basically, if you use this mod and you have this problem, you might be interested in this. It's something to do with the feature of the mod that allows you to tie the speed of the shot to the frames per second. Whenever I check that, it simply stops working. The game stops working, which is no good. So basically, instead of using that feature, I have to use the feature that just straight up reduces the speed of the shot and doesn't tie it to any particular frames per second. So that's what I've been doing, and now I've actually been able to get these nice sweeping shots that really help to show off these builds. Additionally, I also got a new GPU, so I'm able to run the game in 1440p, and also just to generally up the graphics settings, both in the vanilla game and in mods like dynamic resolution and render it, which is a fairly new mod. It allows you to adjust some graphics settings, and I'm just able to run those a lot better now. So I wanted to just do a little bit more justice to the builds I've been doing and trying to get some more streamlined, more beautiful cinematics. So hopefully that comes through in this episode and in future episodes. So my main way to deal with the slope here with these buildings is basically I wanted to make it look like the buildings on top were able to look out over the buildings on the bottom. So I put shorter buildings down by the main street and taller buildings above it. Obviously not in every single case because that just wouldn't be realistic necessarily. And then I just try to flatten out the land here that gets pulled up in between. And we're going to fill that with so many trees. I don't know what that guy was doing. This game sometimes, just ridiculous. So I'll describe very quickly what this area is supposed to be. It's basically a combination of a high-density neighborhood and a bit of a secondary tourist area. We're not going to get to the main tourist area in the city for quite a while, although we're going to be doing a couple builds in the near future that are adjacent to that category. Again, not going to spoil anything. But because of that, I wanted to have bus access as well as this nice pedestrian area that runs along the waterfront. I didn't just want to have development directly along the waterfront across the whole city, although we definitely will be doing some of that. I wanted some natural areas, and this is my first attempt at a bit of a pedestrian promenade that runs, or I guess a malecón, you'd call it, that runs along the riverbank. And basically, very simple, we put down the pedestrian path last episode, and then we have this little patch of green, which is sort of like half manicured, like they keep the grass trimmed, but the trees would just kind of, grow wherever they wanted. And then we have a wall to keep people from just rolling on into the water and drowning. That would be bad. And then along the riverbank, we have this kind of gnarly looking row of mangroves. And I'm going to be taking this all over the city at some point because there are a few waterways, a few rivers that run through the city. And like I said, we'll be doing some development directly along it, but for the most part, it's going to be nice and wild and natural. And they've, wanted to maintain the flora that's already in place instead of replacing it or clearing it out and developing it. And so we have these mangroves along here, which I think look really cool, although the trees, like the actual tree item itself, is quite high in tries, so I may be killing my performance by doing this, but you know what? It's worth it because I love the look. And then I'm just coming through, and I just want to give a little bit of variation to the riverbed here. And by the way, these trees and kind of the general style of buildings, I've gone ahead and mirrored on the other side of the river off screen, so hopefully you'll be able to catch a glimpse of that in the cinematics. It's not as interesting as what I'm showing you, so I just didn't want to include that and make this episode longer than it has to be, especially if the footage that I add is not interesting. Okay, now we're coming in and detailing this path. We're not going to do the whole thing like this, but I just wanted to, again, keep the Sims. They don't really have control over their own bodies, so they're just going to go rolling off the side of the malecón there and just roll into those rocks and get hurt, and we just don't want that. We want to take care of our Sims. So I had that wall there, and I wanted to have a little bit of water access here, public access, and that's something I've been dotting in throughout the city, both off-screen and in stuff we're going to see in the future. So we have a little bit of a small beach here with some nice foliage surrounding it, and I'm going to put in a few props just to make it look like a public park, and then we're going to go in and build a very simple boat launch. Because I imagine that like everyone in the city pretty much would enjoy going out on the water, so we'd want to have quite a few points of access for them that aren't restricted by, having to belong to a club or, being able to pay for it. So basically, I just put down this amazing retaining wall asset, which serves very nicely as a boat launch, I think, when you angle it like this. And I connect it up to this pedestrian path, which doesn't work immediately. Also, I just realized that this doesn't make any sense because there's no road access, so I don't know how people would actually drive in here with boats. So this truck I'm putting down doesn't make any sense, but just ignore that. Not everything can be logical in city skylines. In fact, most things aren't. And anyway, this boat launch could serve things like kayaks or canoes where you could just carry it in. Might be kind of a pain. And, whoever this guy is who parked here just drove up on the malecón and parked here, and it doesn't really care about whatever consequences come from that. And now I'm doing something that, I don't know, I find pretty enjoyable for some reason, or at least I have been in this city so far, which is just blending beach into foliage, like just transitioning from the very dense trees and mangroves and everything to some shrubs and then grass and then sand, just using a few decals and those shrub assets. And I guess that beach isn't very popular for some reason because there are only a few people set up there. You have those few towels and a beach ball and a chair. That's it. I mean, I would like to go to that beach if there are only 4 other people there. That would be sweet. Basically have it to yourself. And then I'm just finishing off the end of the peninsula here. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. If you see to the right there, there's some empty land. I have not developed that yet. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do, if I'm just going to do it off screen, similar to what we've built so far, or if I'm going to maybe designate it for a future project. I don't know. If you have any ideas, leave me a comment and I will definitely take a look at that and consider any ideas you have. Okay, I'm going to silence myself for a moment, and I will meet you over on the avenue we made last episode to put down some road signs. Oh, by the way, look at all those people. That's like nothing compared to how many start crossing that bridge. It's just insane. Yeah, these flying people are everywhere. Kind of weird. I don't know why. I mean, if they can all just walk on air like that, I don't know why they drive anywhere or take the bus or whatever. Oh well. So I wanted to make this avenue look a bit manicured, a bit nice. So I start with these hedges, and that's partially just because they look nice and they fulfill that requirement of looking nice, but also because it kind of helps to cover up the sidewalk on the interior of the avenue, which obviously I don't want people to use it. Of course, they always end up using it. No matter how many, crosswalks I block and everything, somehow they still get to the center, and it ends up basically with them walking on the tram track because of the way the roads are clipped together into the tram track, or the light rail track there. So I just wanted to cover that up in the places where it would be most obvious to see those people. So we're just going to cover up those delinquents with some hedges. Perfectly acceptable thing to do, I think, considering the circumstances. You can decorate this sort of intersection with the intersection marking tool, but I don't know, I find when you're doing lines like this to indicate that you're not supposed to switch lanes at an intersection, I find it just easier to do with decals still, even with how easy the intersection marking tool is to use. Although those sidewalks I probably should have just done with the tool because they're quite easy to do with that. But at this point, I was still fairly new to the mod, so I did not do that. Plus, it just reminds you to go in there, get your camera way down, and put down some dang road signs. Just do it. And then I'm just coming in. It was bothering me how I had that center turning lane road there, which it doesn't necessarily make sense to have that when you're approaching an intersection. So I just changed that into an asymmetrical road to better fit the aesthetic of a turning lane. And then now I'm just going through and doing several passes of adding things like road arrows to indicate where your lane goes, and some things like the all-important one-way signs so people know which direction a road goes. Obviously, the Sims don't actually need the signs, but I just find that road signs really add some depth and detail. And it's kind of fun. I don't know. It just, when you realize that you're going to have to go back in and put down signs that fit the logic of the road system, I don't know. It seems like it kind of encourages me to make your roads a little bit more realistic, I guess. So maybe if you're going for a realistic road layout, it might be worth considering downloading a pack of road signs. The ones I'm using for Todos Santos are fairly outdated because I had to subscribe to each individual sign. As far as the assets themselves, there's no issue with them. But now you can go in and find all kinds of different road signs from all over the world on the workshop. I mean, there's so many great different asset packs. So you could pretty much find a sign pack for any country you could think of, or at least one that's going to adequately represent the country that you're trying to build, if indeed you're trying to make a specific country or something inspired by a specific place, like I am here with Todos Santos, where I've been drawing a lot of this from the beautiful San Juan. Now, I might have mentioned this before, but putting down all these signs make me realize just how many signs there are on roads. I mean, you have right turn only, you have lanes added, you have exits, you have stop signs, you have one-way signs, speed limit signs, lane end signs. Oh, and there's stoplight ahead signs if there hasn't been a stoplight in a while. No left turn. I mean, there's just so many different signs to put down. When you have a one-way system, you have, like I said, the one-way signs, but also so many do not enter signs, so many wrong-way signs. And all of these serve some purpose or another in terms of safety or efficiency of the road network. And it's just kind of crazy to think about how much metal goes into it, but also, all the logistics that go into making your road network function beyond just putting the roads down, which itself is a big endeavor. Okay, now we're moving on to a little continuation of the pedestrian area. Running it along the highway. I imagine this probably wouldn't be the nicest place to walk at night, this particular area. And you probably wouldn't take this path unless you really needed to in the evening, once night had fallen. But I mostly just wanted to do this, one, to have the pedestrian path go somewhere, or the malecón go somewhere, once it had finished its path along the waterfront. 'Cause it seems kind of weird. It doesn't seem that weird to have a path along the waterfront and then just have it end, but I wanted it to go somewhere. But then also I just wanted to do something cool in this area next to the ramp, because it's elevated. And so I just decided to squeeze this pedestrian underpass here. Because pedestrian underpasses are one of those things, like, no matter how nice or well maintained they are, they're always going to be a little creepy. So that's something I wanted to include. And yeah, I just used this very cool path asset, which thankfully has a tunnel option. Not every custom network asset has a tunnel option, but this one does. And then we also continue the pedestrian path in another way, which is with this boardwalk, which would probably be a little bit nicer than the underpass. And this is just a way for people to access by foot either this area that has been cut off by the freeway, where there's a nice public soccer pitch, or it also runs across next to the freeway bridge, which ends up looking a little strange. But anyway, that goes over to the convention center, which we built in episode 8, I think. Wow, that was a long time ago. That was a really long time ago. I've been building this city for quite a while. But it's always kind of interesting to build something and then connect it up with something you built years ago. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it's just always a little strange to see what you thought was a good idea years ago, like now doesn't seem so much of a good idea, or isn't as well executed as you thought it was. But that's really beside the point. So yeah, I don't actually have footage of me dragging the boardwalk across the river there, but you'll see it in the cinematics. There's a nice shot of it. And I just wanted some sort of pedestrian access across there, because it felt weird. I don't want to have tons of bridges over the river here. It's not supposed to be that developed. But I did want some sort of access other than just that one crowded bridge that I showed you earlier. And now that I'm talking about it like this, I wonder if it might be a good idea to rethink that assumption that I should not develop it with bridges and stuff. Maybe I'll go back and change my mind about that. And honestly, it would help resolve some of the congestion that I'm getting in the freeway here, which I mentioned last episode. I don't know. Let me know what you think. And now we are moving on once again to another build, which is a casino and hotel. So I'm trying to fit this sort of large asset in wherever I can, because I don't know. When I go to develop an area where I've already built a road network, it seems like opportunities to fit in buildings like this are pretty slim. So when I see a space like this, especially if it's next to a highway, like that seems like the sort of place where you'd want to have a casino, so you can get all these eyeballs on the big signs and everything. But yeah, when you see a spot like this, just plop down your assets that you have. I usually like to keep a bit of a log of special assets that I want to use, like this one. I don't necessarily have a list or anything, but I just keep them in my head. Although I do actually have a list of recently acquired assets that I like to reference, just to make sure I'm not forgetting any of the amazing assets that I've found on the workshop. But anyway, it's just always nice to find a spot like this where you can actually fit a big build without having to plan way far in advance. Like when I did that convention center in episode 8, I had to go all the way over to the other side of the island to find a spot that really fit that. So it's just, you take the opportunities you get to use the limited assets that you have. And I guess that's what's going to give you, the character of your city. And the uniqueness of your city is just kind of these random chances you get to do stuff. Because it's not like I, sat down and planned this out on paper and said, okay, I want a casino here that looks exactly like this, and then I built it. Although I have done that for several builds. For example, the interchange I made on the island, I did draw that out and know exactly what I wanted to do. But for the most part, I just tend to build by saying, okay, I have an empty space here. What do I want? And then I search through my assets or look at my list and plop down something, whether it's big or small, and then just go from there and try to fill in all the gaps. And that's really what drives most of this series, at least, is that sort of build. Anyway, I append a little kind of cool-looking, wavy-looking hotel there, or it's intended to be a hotel. I think it actually is a residential building, and that's meant to be like the hotel that attaches to the casino. So it would be a hotel and casino. Not everyone who goes there is going to be gambling and losing money because the house always wins, of course. And then I wanted it to look a little bit more bulky, a little bit taller. So I had those two little apartment buildings, and those would just be another branch of the hotel that attaches to the casino. Okay, I'm going to go take an extremely brief silent retreat, and I will meet you back here in just a moment to put down some happy little details. Okay, this place is rebranding from the Gran Casino, which, it's a nice enough name, but somewhat generic. It's rebranding to Don Pernu, which just seems like a nice, fitting name. I think that's one of the kind of mock brands that is included in the game. I might be wrong with that, but I'm not sure. But anyway, we're using this very simple, but kind of almost fancy looking in its own way asset that says Don Pernu. And we're putting that all over the casino. And the main instance of that is this cool little sign. I just have it held up by, it's some sort of pillar, I think for a pedestrian overpass maybe. And with a little bit of a curved brick wall in front of it, which I think looks kind of nice and also hides the, utilitarian nature of the post that's holding up the sign. And then we're getting into decorating this because I figured this is a fairly successful casino. If there's I don't know if there's such a thing as an unsuccessful casino. But anyway, this one is very successful, so they're quite wealthy, so they are able to afford to keep their grounds decorated very nicely and maintained very nicely. So we have this little Puerto Rican flag made out of flowers, in addition to an actual flag. Well, it's pixels, but actual flag, same thing. I didn't have any blue flowers, unfortunately, so I had to use purple, but it's pretty close to blue. You get the general idea. And I suppose in this universe of Todos Santos and Alpenglow and Northern Creek, those are my other cities, by the way, it's not necessarily literally called Puerto Rico, although there's obviously a lot of influence from that, and that's what I'm basing this off of. But it wouldn't necessarily be a direct one-to-one correlation. So we could say that sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's purple in this universe. Kind of weird. But then again, as I've mentioned quite a few times now, Todos Santos is not a normal place. It can be quite beautiful at times, though, if I do say so myself, especially when the stars are out, which doesn't really make sense because it's a giant city, so you'd think you'd get tons of light pollution and you'd only see a few of the brightest stars and the planets, but oh well. And then we're just putting a few signs down to indicate that it's a hill and that there's a big curve there. Probably not the safest road, but it's fairly low speed, so I'm not too worried about the sim safety for the most part. I'm pretty happy with how the way the roads interact with the slope came out there. I think it looks pretty nice, all things considered. And I'm just so happy to have node controller and intersection marking tool, because they just let you make your cities a little bit more natural. And once again, I don't know why I keep going on this billboard tangent in episodes, but we're going on a billboard tangent. And I think that, it really brings, it really just takes the silhouette of the freeway area to another level by having these big, hideous billboards sticking up. I'm not usually one to pick out particular aspects of cities as being ugly. I think a lot of things have, beauty or interest in their own ways, but I think billboards are pretty much unredeemable in terms of the effect they have on the way cities look. But they're still kind of cool to put in there, so I do it. And of course it's realistic, I guess. Okay, we're just doing this pedestrian overpass, and I gotta go kind of rapid fire now because the episode's almost over. I made a little bit of a park right next to this overpass off screen. Footage wasn't very interesting, so I just cut it out, but you'll see a shot of it in the cinematics. And I am just so excited for the next 2 episodes. It's going to be another 2-parter, sort of like we've done the last couple episodes here. So I'm definitely looking forward to sharing that, and I hope that you will enjoy those as well. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Todos Santos. Can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye.